The bus rolled through the heavy iron gates of Fort Grayson, its wheels crunching over gravel as dawn's first light stretched across the barren training fields. The air smelled of steel, sweat, and old echoes of discipline long forgotten. A cold wind whipped through the empty flagpole yard as Captain Elena Harris stepped down from the bus, her boots landing with a deliberate, grounded thud. Every pair of eyes turned her way. Cadets lingered near the barracks, whispering among themselves, their laughter echoing faintly between the hangars. The sight of her, a woman in full uniform, her posture sharp and composed, stirred the air like a challenge. Fort Grayson hadn't seen a female commanding officer in its entire history. Around here, respect was earned through volume, intimidation, and muscle. And Elena? She didn't look like she'd raise her voice for anyone. Captain Harris? A young private approached, nervous and stiff. She nodded, her gaze sweeping across the base. Report. Yes, ma'am. The cadets are assembled in the mess hall for morning meal. Major Tillman said to let you know you can introduce yourself there. Good, she replied curtly. I'll do that. As she walked, boots striking rhythm against the concrete, memories of her past postings flickered through her mind. Kandahar, Okinawa, Colorado Springs, places where she'd faced storms far more dangerous than the one brewing here. Yet there was something different about Fort Grayson, something rotten in its silence. She reached the mess hall doors. Laughter and chatter spilled out. The smell of eggs, coffee, and arrogance filled the air. When Elena entered, the noise didn't die. At most bases, soldiers snapped to attention when an officer entered. Here, they didn't even look up. A few cadets gave lazy half-salutes before returning to their plates. She felt the air shift, casual disrespect coated with insolence. She walked forward, posture straight, her presence slicing through the room even if her rank didn't. She didn't need to speak to command attention. She simply was attention. Her uniform was crisp, medals perfectly aligned, and yet her eyes carried a calm fire that made even the boldest cadets lower their gaze, for a second at least. At the far table sat a group of senior cadets, loud, overconfident, and clearly self-appointed kings of the base. Their leader, Jake Turner, tall, broad-shouldered, and smirking with practiced arrogance, looked up as she passed. His tone dripped with mock respect. Well, looks like command decided to shake things up, he said to his friends, loud enough for her to hear. Guess we've got ourselves a new babysitter. The table erupted in snickers. Elena paused. She didn't turn toward him. Not yet. Her fingers tightened around the steel tray she carried. Years in command had taught her the fine art of silence, the power it held over noise. She continued walking, setting her tray down near the front of the room. Jake wasn't done. Hey, Captain, he called again, voice rising, testing boundaries. Hope you like chaos for breakfast. More laughter. Someone clapped. Every instinct in the room waited for her to explode, to yell, to make a scene, the kind of reaction that fueled rebellion. But Elena only looked up, her eyes calm and measured, and said in a steady tone that carried across the hall, Cadet, what's your name? The room quieted slightly. Jake leaned back, trying to maintain his bravado. Turner. Jake Turner. Well, Cadet Turner, she said softly, thank you for introducing yourself. And with that, she turned back to her meal. It was the simplest, most unexpected thing she could have done. No shouting. No punishment. Just acknowledgement, as if his defiance were too insignificant to merit attention. The cadets didn't know how to process it. The silence that followed felt heavier than any reprimand. Jake grinned, but unease flickered across his face. He'd expected anger, not composure. He didn't realize that his test, meant to embarrass her, had just backfired. Elena finished her meal calmly, while the hall simmered with whispers. She could feel their stares, their silent challenges, but she didn't return them. Her restraint wasn't weakness, it was precision. She knew how to fight battles that mattered, and this one hadn't even begun. When she finally stood, every movement was deliberate. She straightened her jacket, picked up her tray, and set it on the cleaning rack. Then, just before leaving, she turned slightly, enough for her voice to carry without looking directly at them. "Cadet Turner," she said evenly, "next time you speak to an officer during meal hours, you'll remember to stand." Her words weren't loud, but they sliced through the air. Jake froze, his grin faltering. Every cadet in the room went still. She didn't wait for a reply, didn't need one. She walked out with the same calm dignity she'd entered with. Outside, the morning sun cut through the fog as Elena made her way to her quarters. The silence behind her was proof enough. She'd made an impression. Inside her office, a file sat waiting on her desk, a stack of reports detailing Fort Grayson's disciplinary failures over the past 2 years. Missed drills, fights, alcohol violations, even small-scale mutinies. The previous commander had resigned abruptly, citing incompatibility with the culture. Elena scanned the pages slowly, one eyebrow lifting at the sheer chaos on record. This isn't a military base, she thought. It's a fraternity with weapons. She leaned back in her chair, the hum of fluorescent lights buzzing overhead. Her reflection in the window looked calm, but her thoughts burned with strategy. She knew the type of men she was dealing with. Not evil, not broken, just undisciplined, unled, untested. Soldiers waiting to believe in something again. But first, they had to be broken of their arrogance. That evening, Elena stood by the window of her quarters, watching the sun sink over the parade ground. Cadets jogged lazily across the field, shouting jokes. Somewhere in the distance, she heard Jake's laughter again. He was still testing her, probably telling his friends how easily he'd gotten away with disrespect. Elena smiled faintly. Let him think so. True leadership, she knew, wasn't about demanding fear. It was about planting moments, silent, powerful moments, that lingered long after the noise died. Tomorrow, the real test would begin. She picked up her cap, set it neatly on the desk, and turned off the lights. Fort Grayson was asleep. But by the time this base woke up to who she truly was, no one, not even Jake Turner, would doubt who ruled it. The following morning, the flag rose sluggishly over Fort Grayson. Half the cadets still yawning, some still missing. The parade ground looked less like a military training base, and more like a sleepy summer camp. Discipline, once the backbone of the U.S. Army, had become a forgotten echo here. Captain Alana Harris stood at the edge of the field, hands clasped behind her back, her expression unreadable. She didn't yell. She didn't bark orders. She simply watched. Formation at 0700 means everyone here at 0700, barked Sergeant Doyle, one of her subordinates, trying to cover the chaos. But his voice lacked conviction. Even he had grown used to the cadets' careless attitude. Elena's eyes scanned the lines. Sloppy uniforms, unshined boots. A few cadets whispered as she passed, quiet enough to think she couldn't hear, but not quiet enough to hide the tone of mockery. Jake Turner was among them, standing tall with his hands behind his back, but smirk firmly in place. He caught her gaze for a second, a deliberate, almost taunting look. Elena didn't react. She finished the inspection without a word, then turned to Doyle. Have them report to the obstacle field after breakfast. I'll be observing. Doyle nodded, clearly uneasy. Yes, ma'am, but, they're not exactly cooperative with. I'll handle that, she cut in calmly. Just make sure they show up. When she walked away, whispers followed her again. Jake muttered something under his breath, and a few cadets laughed. Doyle shot them a sharp glare, but the damage was done. Respect here wasn't given, and no one at Fort Grayson had any intention of giving it to her. The obstacle course at Fort Grayson was an old beast, rope climbs frayed by years of neglect, trenches half filled with mud and forgotten debris, walls that once tested warriors now merely collected dust. Elena arrived early. She watched the mist rise off the field like smoke before a battle. One by one, the cadets arrived, chatting, yawning, still wearing smirks instead of focus. Jake led the pack, sunglasses perched lazily on his head, sleeves rolled up, the image of swagger in uniform. "All right, boys," he said loud enough for everyone to hear. "Let's show our new captain how we do things around here." A few laughed. Elena stood near the start line, her arms folded. "Good morning, cadets," she said, voice level but sharp enough to cut through their chatter. "You'll be running the full course. Every obstacle. No skips, no shortcuts. And you'll do it as a team." Jake chuckled. "Teamwork, huh?" "Sure thing, ma'am." Her eyes narrowed just slightly, not in anger, but in quiet awareness. "You'll start when I blow the whistle." The whistle screamed through the air, and the cadets took off, or tried to. Within minutes, chaos erupted. 2 cadets got tangled in the rope climb. Another slipped into the trench, cursing. Jake barked orders, but no one listened. Their so-called teamwork fell apart before it even began. Elena stood silently by, clipboard in hand, watching every stumble, every arrogant smirk dissolve into frustration. By the time the last cadet limped across the finish line, the group was panting, muddy, and humiliated. Jake wiped his forehead, his earlier grin gone. "Pathetic," Elena said simply. The word landed heavier than any scream. "This isn't a team. This is a collection of egos tripping over one another. You want to wear the uniform, but none of you have earned it yet." Jake's jaw tightened. "With all due respect, ma'am, we've been doing things this way for a long time. And look where that's gotten you," she replied evenly. "You can't even finish a basic course without falling apart." Her tone wasn't cruel. It was surgical. Every word precise, cutting through excuses and pride alike. She turned to Doyle. "Document their times. They'll repeat the course every morning until they meet standard." Jake took a step forward. "That's impossible." "You're asking," she interrupted quietly. "I'm not asking." The silence that followed was absolute. Even the wind seemed to hold its breath. For the rest of the week, Elena didn't raise her voice once. Instead, she became a silent observer, appearing everywhere, at drills, inspections, mess hours, even late-night patrols. Her presence became an unsettling constant. Cadets found themselves straightening their uniforms without realizing it when she walked by. Behind the calm exterior, though, she was studying every cadet, every weakness, every rift in their brotherhood. She noticed who shirked responsibility and who secretly led when no one was watching. She saw that Jake's arrogance wasn't born of malice. It was a shield, protecting something deeper. Frustration, maybe fear. She'd seen that before. Young soldiers hiding uncertainty behind pride. By midweek, the tension on base had shifted. The cadets whispered about her differently now. "She's strange," one said. "She never yells. She just watches." "Yeah, but it's like she already knows everything you're gonna do." They weren't wrong. Elena's silence was more unnerving than any shouting officer they'd had before. She never threatened, never punished impulsively. But when she did act, it was swift, decisive, and impossible to ignore. One evening, Jake and 2 other cadets skipped curfew. They came back laughing, their boots splattered with mud. Elena was waiting outside the barracks door. "Gentlemen," she said, tone calm but icy, "you're late." Jake stiffened. "We lost track of time. I see. She paused for a moment, then said, You'll report to the field at 0500. Bring your unit with you. For what, ma'am? Discipline, she replied. At dawn, the entire unit stood on the cold field, shivering. Jake glared at her, but she ignored it. You represent Fort Grayson, she said. And Fort Grayson represents the United States Army. You don't get to treat that lightly. Not on my watch. Without another word, she ordered them into physical drills, nothing extraordinary, just enough to wear them down. But when most would have walked away, she stayed. She trained with them, running, climbing, crawling through the mud. By the time the sun rose, sweat poured down her neck, her uniform soaked, but her pace never slowed. The cadets watched her, confused. Officers didn't train with soldiers, not here. But Elena did. Jake's lungs burned, but something strange happened. He found himself matching her rhythm. And for the first time, he wasn't fighting her authority. He was following it. When the session ended, no one dared to complain. She dismissed them quietly, without a single insult or boast. As the cadets trudged away, Jake glanced back. Elena stood alone in the morning light, her expression calm, her presence unshakable. For the first time, he couldn't tell whether he hated her or admired her. That night, the mess hall was quieter than usual. No taunting, no laughter at her expense. Elena ate alone at her usual table, eyes scanning reports as the cadets whispered among themselves. They didn't know it yet, but something fundamental had shifted in Fort Grayson. The base that once laughed at authority had finally met a leader who didn't need to shout to be heard. And as Jake watched her from across the room, he realized something he'd never admit out loud. He had underestimated her. Rain lashed against the mess hall windows that Friday afternoon, turning the parade ground outside into rivers of brown water. Inside, warmth and noise filled the space boots scraping tile, trays clattering, conversations bouncing off the walls. The cadets of Fort Grayson were restless, boxed in by the storm and by a week of discipline they still didn't understand. At the far end of the hall, Jake Turner lounged with his usual circle of followers. He jabbed his fork at his mashed potatoes and muttered, "She's got us running like dogs every dawn. And for what? To prove she can boss us around. Maybe she just wants us scared," one cadet joked. Jake smirked. Then she picked the wrong crowd. His words carried farther than he thought, brushing the ears of cadets who didn't quite share his confidence anymore. Still, a few laughed habit, not conviction. The doors opened. Every conversation stumbled to a halt as Captain Elena Harris entered, rain dripping from the brim of her cap. She shook off the storm, calm and centered, her presence as steady as a metronome. Without a word, she walked to the service line, collected a tray, and moved down the aisle. Jake's smirk sharpened. The earlier tension between them was a spark waiting for fuel, and the week's frustration had soaked everything in gasoline. He whispered, "Watch this." When she reached the center of the hall, Jake and his friends remained seated. Not one of them rose or saluted. A few cadets nearby hesitated, glancing between tradition and rebellion, and followed Jake's lead and stayed put. The air thickened with quiet disbelief. Elena stopped beside their table. Her expression revealed nothing, no anger, no surprise. Only a stillness that made the silence louder. Jake leaned back in his chair. "Afternoon, Captain," he said casually, a grin curling his lip. "Didn't expect to see you eating with us mere mortals." Laughter rippled through his table. Elena set her tray down, perfectly centered on the table nearest them. "Cadet Turner," she said, voice even, "stand up." He didn't move. "We're off duty, ma'am." "Didn't know standing was required during lunch." "It's required when you address an officer," she replied, tone unchanged. "Now stand." Jake hesitated, weighing his pride against the command. He could feel the eyes of the entire hall on him. "And if I don't?" he asked. Elena's gaze didn't waver. "Then you'll learn what happens when defiance meets discipline." For a long heartbeat, no one breathed. Then Jake gave a mocking shrug and stayed seated. Elena exhaled softly, as if deciding something, and looked across the room. "Every cadet in this hall," she said clearly, "finish your meals. Cadet Turner and his table will report outside in full gear in 1 minute." The words hit like thunder. She turned on her heel and walked toward the exit, the echo of her boots cutting through the stunned silence. For a moment, no one moved. Jake's friends exchanged nervous glances. "She's bluffing," one muttered. But the certainty in her tone haunted the air. 30 seconds. Her voice called from outside, calm, patient, absolute. Chairs scraped. One cadet stood, then another. Within a minute, the entire group was on its feet, trays abandoned, faces pale. The mess hall doors swung shut behind them, the laughter gone. Outside, rain slanted sideways, wind howling through the open yard. Elena stood waiting, rain soaking her uniform, cap tucked under her arm. "Form up," she ordered. Jake and his friends scrambled into a crooked line, rain dripping from their helmets. "You had time to disrespect an officer," she said, walking slowly before them. "Now you'll make time to remember why respect exists." No one dared speak. "You'll run the perimeter until I call stop." Not one complaint. Not one shortcut. Move. The group hesitated only a second before bolting into the storm. Mud splashed up their legs as they circled the field, breath turning ragged against the wind. Elena followed at a walking pace, unflinching, her eyes tracking each faltering step. After 20 minutes, Jake's muscles screamed. The storm blurred his vision, rain stinging his face. He risked a glance back. She was still there, upright, composed, rainwater streaming down her jawline like steel. When she finally called, "Halt!" the cadets staggered to a stop, panting, soaked, half-broken. Elena stepped closer, voice steady despite the downpour. "What you felt just now, that exhaustion, that fight to stay upright, that's what leadership feels like every day. It doesn't shout. It endures." Her words weren't yelled. They were delivered like orders carved into stone. Jake looked up, chest heaving. For the first time, he couldn't find a retort. The rain masked the heat rising to his face, embarrassment, anger, something else he didn't understand yet. Elena nodded once. "Dismissed. Clean up and be ready for evening formation. And Turner, next time you challenge authority, make sure you've earned the strength to stand after." She turned away, leading them in silence. Back inside, the mess hall buzzed with rumors. Cadets who had watched from the windows whispered to one another. "She made them run in that storm?" One said. "She didn't even raise her voice," another replied, awe creeping into his tone. By dinner, the story had spread across the base. The woman who everyone thought too calm, too quiet, had just broken the loudest rebel without a single shout. Jake sat in the barracks later that night, polishing his boots mechanically. Every scrape of the brush echoed her words. It doesn't shout. It endures. He'd spent years equating leadership with volume, but something about her composure gnawed at him. He didn't want to admit it, but she'd rattled him. Across the hall, his fellow cadets whispered. For once, they weren't mocking Elena Harris. They were trying to understand her. At that same hour, Elena stood by her office window, rain still tapping softly against the glass. She was drenched, exhausted, but satisfied. The first fracture in their defiance had appeared, not through fear, but through exposure. She hadn't humiliated them. She'd held up a mirror. A soft knock sounded at her door. Sergeant Doyle entered, hesitation in his posture. "Ma'am, words traveling fast. "The cadets are talking. Let them," she said. "Sometimes silence carries farther than shouting." Doyle hesitated. "You think they'll fall in line?" "They will," she said quietly. "But not because they fear me. Because they'll start fearing who they become without discipline." Her gaze drifted back to the storm. Outside, the field was empty now, puddles glinting under the floodlights. She knew the real battle wasn't over. It had only changed shape. The next morning, the air was crisp and clean. The rain had scrubbed the sky into a bright, piercing blue. At breakfast, the cadets entered the mess hall more quietly than usual. Trays clinked, voices stayed low. When Elena walked in, something remarkable happened. Every cadet in the room stood. No order had been given. No one told them to do it. They just did. Jake rose too, his expression unreadable. For the briefest second, their eyes met not in defiance this time, but in acknowledgement. Elena gave a single nod and proceeded to her seat. Fort Grayson had taken its first step toward respect. The transformation wasn't complete, but the storm had cleared the air. And though no one said it out loud, every cadet in that hall knew that from that day forward, no one doubted who truly ruled the base. The next morning, Fort Grayson woke to a strange tension in the air, the kind that made even the sharpest wind feel heavy. The base looked the same from a distance. Drills on the field, flags fluttering, boots stomping in rhythm. But beneath the surface, something was changing. Something unseen but undeniable. Captain Elena Harris had begun to dismantle the old order. And the old order, personified by Cadet Jake Turner and his loyal circle, was not about to surrender quietly. After the field inspection incident, word spread fast. Some cadets whispered that she'd humiliated Jake in front of everyone. Others claimed she was trying to crush the cadet's spirit. A few admired her silent strength, but most weren't ready to say it out loud. By noon, small acts of defiance began to appear like cracks in a wall. Lockers, accidentally, left open. Weapons drills delayed. A missing piece of paperwork that had probably been misplaced. They weren't big rebellions, just tiny rebellions meant to test her patience. Elena noticed every one of them, but she said nothing. Instead, she did what most of them couldn't predict. She listened. That afternoon, she walked through the base without speaking. Her presence turned conversations into silence. When she passed the mechanic's bay, 2 cadets froze mid-laugh, trying to look busy. She stopped, leaned slightly against the doorway, and said calmly, "You too, tell me what you see wrong with that engine." They blinked, confused. One stammered, It's running fine, ma'am." "Incorrect," Elena said, walking closer. She pointed to a loose coupling. It's not secured. One bump, and you'd have a leak in mid-flight. You'd lose pressure in minutes. You'd lose control. You'd crash. You'd die." Her tone wasn't angry. It was factual, surgical. The cadets swallowed hard. Then she looked up at them, her eyes steady. "You think discipline is about rules? It's not. It's about survival." And just like that, she left them standing in silence, ashamed, thoughtful, changed. That moment spread across the base faster than rumors. She wasn't like other officers. She didn't yell, didn't bark orders, didn't crave control. She understood the work, every inch of it, and she made them see what discipline was really for. But Jake Turner wasn't convinced. He sat in his bunk that evening, surrounded by his closest allies, Cadet Vickers, the hothead, Ramos, the joker, and Klein, the quiet one who followed whoever seemed strongest. The room smelled of sweat and tension. "This isn't right," Vickers said, slamming his fist into his knee. "She's turning the place into a boot camp for robots." Ramos snorted. "Newsflash, It's already a boot camp. Jake didn't laugh. He sat quietly, rolling a coin across his knuckles. His jaw was tight, his pride bruised. She made me look like an idiot in front of everyone, he said finally. And she's doing it again, slowly. If we let her keep this up, she'll crush the base. Then what do we do? Klein asked quietly. Jake's eyes darkened. We remind her who really runs this place. It wasn't about rebellion anymore. It was personal. The plan formed quickly. A prank during the next morning's exercise. One that would humiliate her in front of the entire company. It wasn't dangerous, just enough to shake her composure. They needed to make her lose control. The next dawn, Elena walked onto the field, clipboard in hand, ready to oversee formation drills. The air was cold, her breath misting as she gave crisp commands. The cadets moved like clockwork, too precisely, she noticed. Too rehearsed. Something was off. She scanned the rows of faces, and her eyes met Jake's. He smirked, just slightly. Then it happened. A whistle blew, but not hers. Suddenly, dozens of cadets broke formation at once, sprinting in random directions. A line of smoke flares erupted from the side field, filling the air with red haze. The sound of laughter and chaos echoed across the yard. It was mutiny, disguised as a joke. Elena stood still in the middle of it all, the smoke swirling around her boots. Every instinct told her to scream, to demand order, to punish. But she didn't. She waited. After 30 seconds, when the laughter reached its peak, she raised her whistle and blew once. The sound was sharp, clear, commanding. The effect was instant. It wasn't the whistle itself. It was the authority behind it. The cadets stopped mid-laugh, as if their own instincts betrayed them. The red smoke hung heavy, the field frozen in time. Elena's voice was calm, low, and carried across the field with frightening control. "Congratulations," she said. "You've all just demonstrated what chaos looks like." Her gaze swept across the stunned faces. "And since you enjoy running, we'll make that productive. 10 miles. Now. Together. If one of you stops, we all start over." There was a stunned silence. Someone whispered, 10 miles? Elena's eyes didn't waver. 10 miles, she repeated. Let's go. And without another word, she started jogging. The cadets hesitated, then, one by one, began to follow. The laughter died. The sound of boots against gravel replaced it. For the next 2 hours, she ran with them. No shortcuts, no breaks. When someone stumbled, she helped them up. When the weakest slowed, she adjusted her pace. By the 8th mile, the red haze had cleared, replaced by gasps of exhaustion and something else, respect. When they finally stopped, Elena turned to face them. Sweat glistened on her temples, but her eyes were calm as ever. "This is what leadership looks like," she said quietly. "Not noise, not defiance. It's showing up, together." No one spoke. Even Jake, chest heaving, pride shattered, couldn't meet her gaze. She nodded once. Dismissed. As the cadets dispersed, murmurs rippled through the group. Not of rebellion, but of awe. The woman they'd tried to break had outrun them, outlasted them, and outclassed them. Jake lingered behind, staring after her. He felt something unfamiliar tightening in his chest, a mix of anger and admiration. He didn't want to admit it, but deep down, he knew she'd won this round. That night, as rain began to fall across Fort Grayson, Elena stood at her window again, watching the field lights fade. Her reflection was calm, but her heart was heavy. This was more than a battle of wills. It was a test of culture, of belief, of who these cadets could become if they found discipline again. And tomorrow, she knew, would bring the next challenge. The cracks of defiance were closing, but not completely. Some lessons, especially the hardest ones, still had to be earned. For the first time since arriving, she allowed herself a faint smile. They'll learn, even if it breaks them first. For the first time in months, Fort Grayson woke in silence. No laughter in the barracks. No sarcastic jokes at roll call. Only the rhythmic beat of boots hitting the ground and the clipped tone of orders obeyed without question. Captain Elena Harris had done what most thought impossible. She'd taken a base, poisoned by arrogance and chaos, and bent it back toward discipline. But beneath the polished drills and sharp salutes, she sensed something simmering, a fragile balance that could shatter at the slightest pressure. That pressure arrived on a Thursday morning. She was in her office, reviewing progress reports, when a knock echoed on her door. "Enter," she said, without looking up. Major Tillman stepped inside, his expression grim. "Captain Harris, word just came from command headquarters." She glanced up. "Inspection?" He nodded. "Surprise audit. They'll be here in 48 hours. Elena leaned back slightly. Of course. This wasn't her first inspection, but it was the first since taking command of Fort Grayson. If the inspectors found even a trace of misconduct, the base would be shut down and her leadership questioned. The cadets didn't know it yet, but everything, their training, their reputation, even their future careers, hung in the balance. When the news spread, it hit the cadets like a shockwave. An inspection meant everything would be under scrutiny. Maintenance logs, drill precision, discipline, equipment readiness. For some, it was a chance to prove themselves. For others, especially those who'd grown comfortable in rebellion, it felt like a threat. In the mess hall, whispers buzzed like electricity. Jake Turner sat at a corner table, silent, pushing his tray aside. Around him, his friends fidgeted. "This inspection's gonna ruin us," Ramos muttered. "They'll find something, they always do." "Not if we tighten up," Klein said quietly. "She's been preparing us for this, even if we didn't know it." Jake looked up slowly. "Yeah," he said. "She's been preparing herself too. If this goes wrong, it's her head." He didn't sound bitter this time, more thoughtful, like he was weighing something. Vickers snorted. "You're kidding, right? After everything she's pulled, you're worried about her?" Jake didn't answer immediately. He remembered that run, 10 miles under smoke and sun, the moment she turned humiliation into unity. He remembered her silence, her control, her endurance. Something about it had gotten under his skin. He leaned forward. "She's not like the others, Vic. She doesn't bluff. If this place falls, we all go down with her." The others went quiet. Even Vickers looked away. That night, while most cadets slept, Jake found himself walking the perimeter, hands in his pockets, thinking. The rain had just started, a slow drizzle that whispered against the gravel. He stopped near the motor pool and noticed the maintenance logs stacked by the door. They were incomplete, missing signatures, missing details. Old habits. Old carelessness. For a long moment, he stared at the papers, remembering her words. Discipline isn't about rules. It's about survival. Then, almost without realizing why, he stepped inside and started filling in the missing details. Cross-checking dates, fixing errors, cleaning up the mess left by others. He didn't do it for her. Not yet. He did it because something in him finally understood that order wasn't weakness. It was strength. By morning, he wasn't the only one. Word spread that Turner had been in the maintenance bay all night. Suddenly, others started double-checking their logs, repairing uniforms, tightening drills. Elena didn't ask why. She simply observed, silently proud, quietly alert. But not everyone was ready to change. At noon, she received an anonymous note slipped under her door. The handwriting was jagged, rushed. They're going to sabotage the inspection. Watch your back. Her fingers tightened around the paper. Sabotage, she didn't doubt it. Fort Grayson's culture of defiance ran deep. Not everyone wanted redemption. That evening, she called an emergency assembly. The cadets lined up in perfect formation under the fading light. The wind was cold, but her voice carried warmth and steel together. Fort Grayson stands on a knife's edge, she said. 2 days from now, inspectors will walk through this base. They'll look for order, integrity, and unity. They won't find perfection, but they will find purpose. Her gaze swept across the faces before her. You're soldiers, not actors. You don't perform discipline. You live it. Every detail, every motion, every word you speak matters. She paused. If anyone here thinks rebellion earns glory, know this. Defiance doesn't make you strong. Loyalty does. Her words lingered like thunder after a storm. When the formation dismissed, Jake stayed behind. For the first time, he approached her directly. Captain, he said quietly. Elena turned. Cadet Turner. I heard there might be trouble, he said, his tone hesitant. Some cadets aren't taking this inspection seriously. I know, she replied simply. And I know who they are. Jake frowned. Then why not kick them out? Because that's not leadership, she said. Leadership isn't cutting the weak. It's showing them why they're worth saving. Jake looked at her, really looked, for the first time. The woman he'd mocked, tested, defied. She wasn't driven by ego or control. She was driven by purpose. Why do you care so much about this place? He asked quietly. Her gaze softened, just a fraction. Because I've seen what happens when soldiers forget what they stand for. I've buried those memories. I don't want to bury anyone else. Jake didn't respond. He just nodded, the weight of her words sinking in. That night, while the base slept, Elena couldn't. She walked through the dark corridors, listening to the hum of distant generators. She thought of her own mentors, the officers who'd believed in her when others hadn't. She thought of the men who'd once laughed when she'd been assigned her first command. And now she was here, facing the same wall of arrogance, determined to break it not with punishment, but with conviction. But she also knew something else. When people feel cornered, they get dangerous. At 2 a.m., a loud bang echoed through the compound, the unmistakable sound of an explosion. Elena bolted from her quarters, racing toward the motor pool. Flames licked the edges of the storage shed. A fuel canister had been knocked over and ignited. Sirens wailed, cadets pouring out into the night, some shouting, others frozen in shock. Fire crew, move! She barked, grabbing a nearby extinguisher and running straight toward the flames. Jake was already there, coughing through the smoke, dragging a hose line into place. Elena, that's too close. Tillman shouted, but she didn't stop. She sprayed the extinguisher across the base of the fire, directing the cadets in controlled bursts. Steady. Focus on the left flank. Don't panic, just act. Minutes felt like hours, but the fire finally hissed out. The air stank of fuel and fear. No one spoke for a long time. Then Elena turned to the group, face streaked with soot, eyes burning with something deeper than anger. This, she said softly, is what rebellion costs. Someone could have died tonight. Her words cut through the silence. Jake stepped forward, voice hoarse. We'll find who did it. Elena nodded, still breathing hard. No, Turner. We will. Together. As dawn broke over Fort Grayson, smoke still curling in the distance, the cadets finally understood something. Leadership wasn't about commanding fear. It was about standing in the fire and refusing to back down. And though the inspection was still a day away, the base had already faced its true test. The morning of the inspection dawned gray and cold, the kind of chill that seeped through metal, bone, and pride alike. A mist hovered over Fort Grayson, blurring the edges of the parade ground and turning the flagpole into a ghostly silhouette. Captain Elena Harris was up before dawn, her uniform pressed to perfection, boots gleaming like mirrors. She looked calm, but inside she felt the storm brewing. The fire incident had shaken the base, but it had also forged something new, unity born from near disaster. Still, she knew that the inspection would test everything they'd rebuilt. At 08:00 hours sharp, 3 black SUVs rolled through the front gates. Out stepped Colonel Raymond Pierce, a man known throughout the Army for 2 things: precision and merciless honesty. Behind him followed 2 officers with clipboards and cold expressions. "Captain Harris," the colonel greeted, his tone formal, eyes unreadable. "Sir," she replied, standing tall. Pierce gave a brief nod. "We'll be conducting a full operational review. Readiness, maintenance, and discipline. I trust your cadets are prepared." "They are, sir," Elena said evenly. He studied her face for a moment, longer than necessary. "We'll see." The inspection began with drills. The cadets lined up in flawless formation under the overcast sky. Every movement was crisp, every shout synchronized. The air buzzed with tension as Colonel Pierce paced the rows, his boots slicing through the silence. He stopped in front of Jake Turner. "Cadet, when was the last time this base performed an unscheduled readiness drill?" Jake's answer was immediate. 3 days ago, sir. Conducted under Captain Harris's direct supervision." Pierce raised an eyebrow. "And results?" Jake didn't blink. "Full operational compliance, sir." The colonel's gaze flicked toward Elena, and back to Jake. "Good." He moved on, clipboard ticking like a clock. For 2 hours, the inspection continued. Weapons maintenance, barracks cleanliness, communication readiness. Each department held its breath as Pierce checked every corner, every drawer, every record. So far, nothing had gone wrong. Until the last phase, the logistics audit. The colonel entered the motor pool, where rows of armored vehicles stood gleaming in the pale light. Everything looked perfect, until one of the inspectors frowned at a maintenance log. "Colonel," he called, "we have a discrepancy here." The air froze. Elena's pulse quickened as she approached. The logbook lay open on a workbench, the page smeared faintly with oil. The inspector pointed to a line entry. "Vehicle C-12. Fuel system inspection signed off 2 weeks ago, but the system still tagged for maintenance." Pierce's eyes narrowed. "Meaning it was cleared without being repaired?" Elena's jaw tightened. "That's not possible." The colonel turned toward her. "So you're telling me this signature," he pointed to the bottom line, "isn't valid?" She leaned closer. Her stomach sank. The signature wasn't hers, but it was a forgery of it. Someone had tried to frame her. For a brief second, silence swallowed the motor pool. Then Pierce spoke, voice low but sharp. "Captain Harris, I hope you understand the seriousness of this error. Falsified reports are grounds for disciplinary action." Every cadet in the room stood frozen, their hard-won respect trembling on the edge of collapse. But before Elena could respond, Jake stepped forward. "Sir, permission to speak." Pierce turned. "Granted." Jake's voice was steady but fierce. "That log was tampered with. I was in this bay the night before last. I saw someone near those files, Cadet Vickers." The words hit the air like a grenade. The other cadets gasped. Vickers, standing at the back, turned pale. "That's a lie." He snapped. "You're just covering for her." "Enough," Elena said sharply. Her eyes locked onto Vickers. "Is it true?" Vickers looked around, his breathing ragged. I didn't mean to. I just thought Thought what? She pressed. That if the inspection failed, they'd send you away. He blurted. This place was never supposed to have a woman in charge. Everyone said you'd ruin it. The words echoed through the bay like thunder. Pierce's expression hardened. You forged an officer's signature. You nearly destroyed this base's record. Vickers's shoulders slumped. I just wanted things to go back to how they were. Elena's voice, when it came, was steady, calm but unyielding. The old Fort Grayson nearly burned to the ground because of that attitude. You wanted the past? The past got men killed. No one spoke. The colonel gestured to the MPs at the door. Cadet Vickers will be removed from duty pending court-martial review. As the soldiers led him away, the silence that followed wasn't just relief, it was transformation. The rest of the cadets stood straighter, eyes sharper, as if a dark cloud had finally lifted. Pierce turned to Elena. You've got a hell of a mess here, Captain. But you've also got something rare. She met his gaze. What's that, sir? He looked around the room at the cadets, Jake, Klein, Ramos, each one standing tall. Loyalty that wasn't bought or forced. You earned it. For the first time since his arrival, a faint hint of approval crossed his face. Proceed with the next section. The remainder of the inspection ran like clockwork. No missed details, no careless errors, no defiance. When it finally ended at 1600 hours, Colonel Pierce gathered his team outside the command office. He closed his clipboard. Fort Grayson passes inspection with distinction. The words hit like a shockwave. Cadets exhaled in disbelief. Some cheered quietly. Elena only nodded, a single tear of pride threatening to betray her calm. Pierce extended a hand. You've turned this place around, Captain. I don't know how you did it, but you did. Thank you, sir. As his convoy drove away, Elena stood at the gate, watching until the last SUV disappeared beyond the horizon. Then she turned toward the parade ground, where the cadets waited, silent, expectant. Jake stepped forward, saluted sharply, and said, Fort Grayson stands ready, ma'am. She returned the salute, her voice soft but firm. It does now. Applause broke out, hesitant at first, then stronger, louder, until the sound rolled across the base like thunder. It wasn't forced, it wasn't fear-driven, it was genuine. For the first time, Elena smiled fully. She saw not soldiers or rebels, but a team, one that had learned through pain, fire, and failure what unity truly meant. Later that night, Jake knocked on her office door. She looked up from her desk. Come in, cadet. He entered, standing at attention. Ma'am, I just wanted to say, I was wrong about you. Elena raised an eyebrow. About me? He nodded. About what strength looks like. I thought it was about control, but it's really about calm. About being steady when everything else burns. She studied him for a moment and said quietly, You learned the hardest lesson there is. Don't lose it. Jake smiled faintly. No, ma'am. Not after what we've been through. As he turned to leave, Elena called after him. Turner. He looked back. She gave a rare, warm nod. You did well. He smiled, saluted, and left, the door closing softly behind him. Outside, Fort Grayson was quiet again, but this time, it was a different kind of silence. Not fear, not tension, just peace earned through struggle. Elena stood by the window, the stars faintly visible beyond the clouds. She thought of the journey, the defiance, the mockery, the rebellion, the fire. And now, finally, the respect. Fort Grayson wasn't perfect yet, but it was no longer lost. And neither was she. The morning after the inspection was unusually bright for Fort Grayson. Sunlight filtered through the barracks windows, illuminating rows of perfectly aligned beds, shining boots, and polished rifles. The base had survived the scrutiny of Colonel Pierce and his team. Yet the atmosphere felt fragile, as though the calm could shatter if a single wrong word was spoken. Captain Elena Harris strode across the parade ground, clipboard in hand, observing her cadets. Gone were the whispers of defiance. Gone were the mocking smirks. Every movement, every posture, spoke of respect, but she knew better than to trust appearances alone. Real change was measured not in formality, but in character. Jake Turner was already waiting, standing at attention near the obstacle course. His uniform was immaculate, his expression thoughtful. For the first time, he didn't try to push back. Instead, he observed, quiet, absorbing the weight of responsibility he hadn't yet fully embraced. "Elena," he said, approaching as she neared, "the cadets. They're all different today. Even the ones who were hardest to reach." She nodded without looking away. "They're learning. But one day of obedience doesn't erase years of rebellion." Their conversation was interrupted by the sound of the MPs marching toward the barracks. Cadet Vickers was being escorted under strict supervision, handcuffed and silent. The young man who had once attempted to sabotage the base now walked like a broken soldier. Elena's eyes softened for a brief moment. "Let him learn the consequences of his actions," she said quietly. "But remember, Turner, punishment alone does not teach loyalty. Only accountability does." Jake nodded. His thoughts drifted to the night of the fire, the chaos, and the inspection. He realized then that Elena's leadership wasn't about power. It was about shaping soldiers into something greater than themselves. The morning routine resumed, but Elena had something special planned. She called the cadets to the obstacle course for an unannounced challenge, a final test to gauge whether the lessons had truly taken root. The cadets arrived, tense but alert. Elena stood at the start line, her presence commanding, without a single word raised in anger. "Today," she began, voice steady, "you will perform the ultimate obstacle circuit. This is not about speed. It is not about competition. It is about teamwork, focus, and accountability. You fail as a unit, you repeat the course." Jake's jaw tightened. He glanced around at his peers. This wasn't a drill. This was the crucible. "Captain, what's different about this?" Ramos asked nervously. "Everything," Elena replied simply. The whistle blew. The cadets surged forward. Ropes, mud trenches, climbing walls, narrow beams. Everything designed to break their balance, test their endurance, and challenge their coordination. But this time, something had changed. No cadet stumbled alone. When one faltered, another was there to help. When a rope climb seemed impossible, others steadied the line, offering guidance. Every shout of encouragement, every hand extended, spoke of an unspoken agreement. They were no longer individuals fighting authority. They were a team, bound by respect, discipline, and shared purpose. Jake felt the weight of responsibility in every movement. He led where he had once rebelled, guided where he had once ignored, and supported where he had once competed. He realized he had become the kind of leader Elena had demanded he see in himself. By the end of the course, exhaustion coated every cadet like mud. Hearts pounded, lungs burned, and muscles screamed. And yet they stood together, victorious not because they had finished first, but because they had finished together. Elena observed silently, a faint smile breaking her otherwise stoic expression. The aftermath of the challenge brought an unexpected moment of reflection. The cadets gathered near the parade ground, soaked with sweat, mud, and pride. "Elena," Klein said quietly, "we get it now. Discipline isn't about following orders blindly. It's about knowing why we follow." She nodded. "Exactly. Leadership is not about who shouts the loudest, who imposes fear, or who forces respect. Leadership is about guiding others to be better than themselves, even when they don't want to be. Jake stepped forward, meeting her gaze. "Ma'am, I owe you an apology." Elena raised an eyebrow. "Go on. I was wrong about you, about the way leadership works, about the base, about everything. I thought strength was about defiance, about arrogance. But it's not. It's about endurance, integrity, and courage, the kind you've shown every single day." For the first time, he let himself speak without bravado. "I want to be that kind of soldier, ma'am. And I want to help these cadets be the same." Her eyes softened slightly. "Then prove it, Turner. Every day. Not for me. Not for the base. For yourself, and for the men and women who'll follow you when I'm gone." Later that evening, the MPs returned with Cadet Vickers. He was still under review, but his demeanor had shifted. He avoided eye contact at first, ashamed of his actions. Elena stepped forward. "Cadet Vickers," she said, "you endangered this base, and you risked lives. What you did was unacceptable." He nodded, voice trembling. "Yes, ma'am. I understand." "Good. You will face the consequences, but the opportunity to learn still exists. Your actions have consequences, but they don't define you unless you let them." Vickers' eyes flicked toward Jake and the other cadets. I want to do better," he admitted. Elena nodded. "Then start now. Work with them. Learn, grow." For the first time, the group felt whole. Even those who had rebelled could see the path forward, one marked by accountability, resilience, and respect. Night fell over Fort Grayson, and the base settled into quiet, a different quiet than before. No tension, no smoldering rebellion. Only the hum of generators and the distant call of a guard changing shift. Elena walked along the empty parade ground, reflecting on the past week. The rebellion, the fire, the inspection, the obstacles. Every moment had been a test, not just for the cadets, but for her. She had commanded without shouting, corrected without humiliation, and led without fear. Jake emerged from the barracks, pausing at the gate. "Ma'am?" "Yes, Turner?" He looked up at her, serious. No trace of the arrogance he once wore like armor. "Thank you. For everything, we couldn't have done it without you." She gave him a faint, approving nod. "Don't thank me. Thank yourself. And remember, the greatest challenge isn't surviving me. It's surviving the world outside this base." He swallowed hard. "I won't forget, ma'am." Elena smiled faintly, turning toward the barracks. The future of Fort Grayson wasn't guaranteed. Mistakes could still happen. Rebellion could still flare. But tonight, she allowed herself a rare moment of satisfaction. For the first time, she could see it clearly. Fort Grayson wasn't lost. Its cadets weren't broken. And she had finally earned the respect she deserved. Not through fear, but through unwavering resolve. And in that quiet, under the stars, the base slept peacefully, ready for whatever tomorrow would bring. Dawn broke over Fort Grayson with a brilliance that seemed almost symbolic. Golden rays cut through the morning mist, glinting off polished boots and glimmering rifles. The base, once chaotic and divided, now radiated order, precision, and unity. Captain Alana Harris stood atop the main parade platform, scanning the rows of cadets assembled below. Their postures were straight, eyes forward, breaths synchronized, not out of fear, but respect. This sight, years in the making, filled her with quiet satisfaction. Beside her, Jake Turner shifted slightly on his heels. Gone was the smirk, the defiance, the arrogance that had once defined him. In its place stood a soldier transformed, strong, disciplined, and aware of the weight of responsibility. He had become a leader not because he commanded obedience, but because he had learned to inspire it. Elena's voice cut through the crisp air, steady and commanding. Cadets of Fort Grayson, today is not just another formation. Today marks the culmination of the trials, the lessons, and the challenges you have faced over the past weeks. You have been tested by fire, by rebellion, and by authority. And you have passed, not because you obeyed, but because you understood. The cadets shifted slightly, the sun catching on their determined faces. For a moment, the world seemed to hold its breath. Elena continued, "Leadership is not about asserting power. It is about endurance, integrity, and accountability. Those who cannot uphold these standards are left behind. Those who rise, those who prove themselves, earn the right to lead and protect others. You, cadets, have earned that right." A murmur of acknowledgement spread through the ranks. Each cadet knew the truth in her words. The chaos, the fire, the sabotage, all had been opportunities to learn, to grow, to prove themselves. Jake stepped forward, voice strong but reverent. "Ma'am, may I speak?" Elena nodded. He cleared his throat, gaze sweeping the formation. "We've seen what leadership really is. It's not loud. It's steady. It's patient. It's enduring when everything else wants to collapse. Captain Harris, you've shown us that. You didn't break us to make us afraid. You pushed us to make us stronger. And for that, I speak for every cadet here when I say, thank you." A faint smile touched Elena's lips. She could see the transformation in every cadet, not just the ones who had openly challenged her, but even those who had quietly resisted. The respect was no longer imposed. It was earned. Then came the final test, one that Elena had planned from the beginning, but hadn't revealed. "Cadets," she said, voice low but carrying, "today you will perform the final drill. It is unscheduled, unannounced. Every unit, every task, every system, ready yourselves as if the entire world depends on it. This is not a drill in the traditional sense. It is a test of character, unity, and resilience." The cadets exchanged glances, a mix of nerves and determination. They had faced fire, sabotage, and inspection. Could they rise to this challenge as well? Elena raised her hand, signaling the start. Instantly, the base erupted into action. Jake took the lead, coordinating units with confidence and precision. Ramos ran communication checks, ensuring all signals were clear. Klein and others moved through equipment, correcting every minor flaw. Every cadet anticipated the needs of the group, moving not for recognition, but for the mission. Even the cadets who had once resisted, including Vickers, now fully integrated into the team, performed with newfound purpose. The lessons of the past weeks had crystallized into instinct. Discipline was no longer a rule. It was part of who they were. Elena observed silently, walking the course, occasionally correcting a minor error with a word or gesture. She didn't have to shout. She didn't have to intimidate. Her presence alone commanded excellence. By mid-afternoon, the final drill was complete. Every task executed flawlessly, every unit functioning as one. The cadets, though exhausted, stood taller than ever before, united, capable, and proud. Elena called them together in the main parade ground. "Look at yourselves," she said, her voice soft but unwavering. "This is what strength looks like. Not just physical endurance, not just precision drills, but integrity, accountability, and loyalty. You are not the same cadets who doubted, who defied, who mocked. You are leaders in your own right. And from this day forward, Fort Grayson will reflect that strength in every corner, every operation, every mission." Silence fell for a heartbeat. Then, slowly, a spontaneous cheer rose from the cadets. It wasn't forced. It wasn't hollow. It was a sound of triumph, earned through struggle, fire, and unwavering resolve. Jake stepped forward again, saluting sharply. "Ma'am, we are ready." Whatever comes next, Fort Grayson stands united. Elena returned the salute. Then let the future know, the Fort Grayson cadets will never falter. They will lead with honor, fight with courage, and endure with strength. You have proven that. Remember it always. The following days were marked by routine, but also by respect that had finally become habitual. Cadets no longer acted out of fear, nor did they rebel for the sake of defiance. They held themselves accountable, supported one another, and worked together as a cohesive unit. Jake, once the symbol of arrogance and defiance, had transformed into a reliable leader, guiding younger cadets with patience and insight. Even those who had challenged Elena's authority, the hardest now sought her guidance, understanding that true leadership was earned, not demanded. Vickers, having faced the consequences of his sabotage, worked tirelessly to regain the trust of his peers. Each success, each demonstration of diligence, reinforced the lesson Elena had instilled. Mistakes are part of growth, but accountability shapes character. Elena herself remained vigilant, knowing that leadership was a continual process. Yet she allowed herself moments of reflection, rare, quiet moments where she could see the tangible results of her unwavering resolve. The base, once fractured and chaotic, had become a model of discipline and cohesion. Her leadership had been tested under fire, rebellion, and scrutiny, and she had emerged not just victorious, but respected beyond question. As the sun set over Fort Grayson, golden light washed over the parade ground. Elena stood alone for a moment, gazing at the formation of cadets now at ease, laughing softly, cleaning equipment, or quietly practicing drills. She could see the transformation in every face, the pride, the respect, the understanding that discipline and loyalty were not burdens, but strengths. Captain Elena Harris had not just ruled Fort Grayson. She had shaped it, molded it, and transformed its people. And in doing so, she left a legacy that would endure long after she herself was gone. In the distance, Jake Turner looked up at her office window. He smiled faintly, a mix of gratitude and respect. For him, for the cadets, and for the base, the lesson was clear. Leadership was not about being feared. It was about being steadfast, earning trust, and showing the way, even in the storm. Fort Grayson had survived defiance, fire, and challenge. But more importantly, it had thrived under a leader who understood strength, endurance, and the true meaning of respect. And from that day forward, no one doubted who ruled the base, not because of power, but because of character.